Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin daf Pei Aleph. We're almost at the end of the Masechet. Just a reminder what's happening. So today we will be doing the second to last daf. On Sunday we will do the last daf and finish at the Siyum. We have a great program, so I hope everyone's joining. If not, you can always watch it after. It will be up online. And tomorrow morning we are starting Bava Kama. So come to the Zoom. We're going to do the Shabbos daf on Friday, and we will see you there. Today's stuff is sponsored by Martin Gaynor, in loving memory of Dr. Jerry Rabinowitz. Today's stuff is sponsored by Rivka Martin Himmel, in loving memory of her grandparents, Yichil ben Meir and Fege bat Meir, Hashem yikom damam, who were taken out to be murdered with many of the Jews in their town in Poland on the 18th of Cheshvan. Today's stuff is sponsored also by Elisha Begray in honor of all the hostages, our courageous Chayalim, and all their families. Also with much appreciation to Rabbanit Michelle for her steady wisdom and unwavering dedication, continuing to bring the pages of Talmud alive for us even at such a difficult time. Thank you. Okay, we're going to get started. We have a bit of a long daf with a lot of stories. We're going to talk a lot about yichud, and I think the reason why they bring stories is they want us to understand. And if you think about this throughout the daf, the message of today's daf is you might think that yichud is not such a big deal, and I could be alone in a room with another man, or a man could be in a room with another woman without anything transpiring. But surprises happen and unexpected things happen, and you never know how what might happen. And we're going to see, and what they use, because that's what the Gemara likes to use, is rabbis as examples, where, these rabbis think, oh, that'll never happen to me, and then something happens to them. So we're going to see all sorts of stories about that. We're going to start with a few more of the details of yichud. So, and throughout, it's going to be kind of story, and then some details, and then story. It's going to be a little bit of back and forth, not exactly the most clear structure of a daf here, but we're going to continue with the details. So we ended yesterday toward the bottom of Pam Bet about this halacha, that the concern for date rape, that even, not date rape, gang rape, that even if you have, even though the halacha is 2 men, 1 woman is okay, but if there are people who might theoretically gang up on this woman and they're not good people, we'll see in a minute how we exactly define that, or in a few minutes, but you might be surprised by the definition, or at least the way Rav treated it, but that there could be a potential for that. If there's potential for that kind of thing to happen, then even 3 men, 4 men, 5 men, 6 men shouldn't be alone with 1 woman. And then they wanted to bring this support. So after they say this, they say, right, and they gave this example that there was a maaseh, where 10 men took this girl out, they carried her out of the town. Amar of Yosef Tedad Mechabre Be'asara Beganve Kashur Velamachas Be'amahadade. 10 people could steal 1 beam, and they won't be embarrassed by it. Now, what's between 10 people in a beam? And remember this, because we're going to get back to something like this later. Sometimes you can have a beam that's so heavy that you can't steal it unless you have 10 people carrying it. And what do you see here? That if 10 people carry this beam out and steal it, obviously no one's embarrassed from the other, and therefore, right, they'll keep it a secret between them, and they won't have any qualms doing this without, worrying that it'll be found out. Because sometimes people gang up to do bad things. Name a Mesayale. Now, why don't we provide support from this Mishnah for this following halacha that Rav said? Remember, by the way, that it was Rav that said this. Rav said 2 men with 1 woman are only okay with ksherim, with good people, but if they're not ksherim, right, which again, how exactly you define that, it's not allowed. So just remember that for later. Now we want to bring support for what Rav said from the following Mishnah. We have our Sota woman. You might remember this from Masechet Sotah. She is on the way to the temple. The husband accused her. Once he accuses her, he can't have relations with her. If he does, what will happen? Well, if he doesn't, we don't know about it, and we have her drink the Sota waters. The Sota waters don't work, and that they learn from Menukeme Avon. We have to be free from sin, and the drasha is that the man needs to be free from sin in order for the woman to be tested properly. So if he has relations with her, and then they do the Sota waters anyway, because nobody knows, well, what's going to happen? They're going to erase God's name to do the Sota waters, which is allowed only in the case where really it's going to work, but it's not going to actually work. So it's going to be erasing God's name for no reason. So in order to prevent that kind of thing from happening while they're on the way, and again, this is we're going to talk about today, when you're on the way, that's when, you're outside the city. That's when most likely you're the most secluded there. So they give him 2 Talmidei Chachamim. Now notice what they give him, 2 Talmidei Chachamim. So what can you learn from this? Talmidei Chachamim in Sheda Amalo. Sounds like 2 Talmidei Chachamim is good to protect. But if they weren't Talmidei Chachamim, right, why not just 2 any people? Once there's 2 guys and him, right, there's no yichud problem. So what must it be? Well, the reason they do Talmidei Chachamim is because they're worried if they're not Talmidei Chachamim, maybe they'll be people who are not exactly, the right kind of guys, and maybe they'll all either gang up on her and rape her, or maybe the husband will have relations with her and they won't care and they just won't tell anybody because they could care less. So that's why they need Talmidei Chachamim, and that would then prove Rav. To which they say, no. Shani Talmidei Chachamim diyadi latruye. Why specifically Talmidei Chachamim, Torah scholars? Because they know to warn her. In other words, him. We want this person to know the halacha. He might not know that he can't sleep with his wife at this point. So we want to make sure that there's someone there telling him the halacha. So that has nothing to do with this. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Now Rav makes another statement. Lo shanu ela ba'il. Aval b'derech ad shiu shlosha. The 2 people is only if you're in the city. But when you go out of the city and you're going on a trip, you need 3. Shema yitzarech echad mehem lahashtin. Okay, they have no qualms talking about this very graphically, but maybe someone needs to go urinate, and the other one will be left alone. Because again, when you're out, right, you have to go all the way off to the side somewhere to do your thing, and therefore you'll end up with 2 men and 1 woman, and therefore we want to avoid that. So make sure, right, if there's only 2, then 1 will go off and 1 will be left alone with the woman, and that will be a problem. So that's why you need 3. And again, they're going to say, let's prove this statement of Rav from that Mishnah. They gave him 2 people. Why they give him 2 people if not for that? Right? So that he doesn't end up having relations with her. Right? Simple math. 2 + 1 is 3. The reason why they're there is so we have witnesses. And in fact, I see you were writing this in the chat. I wanted to mention it as well. There's a whole discussion there. What exactly we need the 2 Talmidei Chachamim for? And it's the same. We have the exact same thing. Mosrim Loshnei Talmidei Chachamim for the guy who's running to the Ir Miklat, to the refuge city. We talked about the comparison and stuff. There's this whole question exactly what their job is. So here they're saying one of the answers we gave then in Sota was that the role is to be warning them. Okay, which could be similar to the Ir Miklat, which is to warn the Goel Adam, the relative, that you can't kill this person. Right? It's one of the possibilities. Okay, moving on. Now, remember Rav. So here we have Rav and Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda was the one who passed down these statements in the name of Rav. So Rav and Rav Yehuda have a ka'az of orche. First story for today. They're walking. They're traveling on a path. There's a woman right in front of them. Amar le Rav Yehuda. Dal karech mekami gehenom. He says, quickly move your legs, like move fast, let's get out of here so we don't end up in hell, says Rav. Hamarle, Rav Yehuda says to him, wait a minute, I don't get it. The Hamar Huda Amar, you're the one who said, Biksherim Shapridame, right? What is Ksherim if not us, right? Ksherim, 2 men and 1 woman is fine. So if we end up walking with this woman on the path, who cares? We're 2 men, she's 1 woman, nothing's going to happen. Amarle, Rav says to him, Mi Yemer, the Biksherim Kigon Anava'at. Who's to say Ksherim is you and me? Ela Kigon Mai, Kigon Rabbi Chanina Bar Papi v'Chaveras. They're the people, Rabbi Chanina Bar Papi and his friends, they're the ones who are ksherim. I didn't mean people like us. We're not ksherim. 2 of us, we shouldn't be alone with a woman. Something might actually happen. Fascinating that Rav says this about his own self, right? Maybe he knew himself and his temptation. Who is this Rabbi Chanina Bar Papi and his friends? Now, this is good review because if you go back to Lamed Tet Amud and Daf Mem, there's a slew of stories. And I want to remind you a little bit of them because what's very interesting is in our daf today, there's going to be references to a bunch of things on that daf, not clear, like this is a clear reference to that, but there's going to be parts of those stories that appear in these stories, okay, a few elements from them. So one story, I'll remind you of some of the details. Rav Chanina Bar Papi was the one who, a matronita, this Roman woman, wants to seduce him, and he gets boils on his body to protect himself, right, like so that he looks disgusting, and then she heals him with her magic, her witchcraft, and then he goes and hides in the bathhouse. Okay, and then he's saved, even though there's mazikim there, there's evil spirits, and then the rabbis say, you must have had an encounter with someone that you weren't supposed to, and not give into your temptations, and that's why you got saved from this terrible evil spirit that, could have gotten you in the bathhouse. And in fact, that's what happened. Then we have another story where the guy, the matronita, is trying to seduce him, and then he jumps into the oven. Remember, he says, prepare me some food, and then he jumps into the oven, and then just, what are you doing in the oven, right? Like there's a fire going there, and then he says, right, well, I'd rather do this than be seduced by you, like otherwise I'll burn in hell. So, and then she says, oh, had you told me that, I never would have, I didn't realize how serious this was, I wouldn't have started up with you. Anyway, those are some of the stories that are there, and we're going to see some of those things repeat on our daf. So basically what Rav is saying, what's the difference between Chanina Bar Papi and him? Could be Rav is totally fine, but what he's saying is, I never had to deal with this temptation before. I don't know how I'll be when this actually happens, so let's just avoid the situation. Whereas Chanina Bar Papi and his friends were in a situation where they were tempted to do something, and yet they held back and prevented themselves. So they could be alone, 2 of them with a woman, but not us. Amar Rav. Now Rav continues, and now we're having some halachot. You can get lashes if you were secluded with a woman. Okay, but Rashi says makat mardut. We're not talking about by Torah law. This isn't the Torah law. This is by rabbinic law. Ve'ein osrim al hayichud. But this is very interesting. A man and woman are alone in a room together. She's a married woman and she's with a different man. Now, if you remember, if something transpires, well, then she's forbidden to her husband. But they say if they were just secluded in a room, that's not enough to forbid her to her husband. Well, now you have to start thinking of all sorts of ramifications. And this is what Rav Ashi said. Amar Rav Ashi, lo maran ela bichud pnuya. This is only that you get lashes if it's with a single woman. Aval bichud de'eshet ish lo. He says, listen, if we start giving lashes to a woman who is secluded with a married woman who is secluded with a man, people are going to say, oh, they're in a room alone. They got lashes. What's going to happen? We're not going to give her lashes, because if we give her lashes, people are going to start saying, oh, maybe her kid is an illegitimate child. And we don't want people to start saying that. So we're not going to, fascinating thought. Theoretically, she should get lashes. And in fact, Eshet Ish is much more severe if she's in the room alone with a man than a single woman. And what Rav Ashi says is only single women are going to get lashes. We're not going to give lashes to married women because we have to think about the ramifications of what people will say about this woman. And they'll say her children are mamzerim, and we don't want that to happen. Mar Zutra had a different solution. Malkei Machris. He would give lashes to the woman, but he would announce, but this woman's children are not considered mamzerim, right? And she's not forbidden to her husband. Like, he'd make it very clear that it's just because they were secluded. Amalei Rav Nachman mi Parhatia le Rav Ashi. So Rav Nachman from Parhatia says to Rav Ashi, Marnoni lilka belichris. Why don't you do that? Give lashes, right? If that's what you're worried about, just make an announcement about it. Hamarle, this always comes up. This is the response to these kind of questions. Some people will hear, right? The way rumors get spread is they're always incomplete. People will hear that she got lashes for being alone in the room with this man. They might not hear that, well, she's, don't say her children are mamzerim. So therefore, better not to do this at all, right? It's very interesting that he really thought, even though theoretically someone should get punished, he said, this doesn't make any sense, right? And not that it doesn't make sense. He's very much worried about thinking forward, what will happen if I rule this way, right? And what are possible problems that will come about? Amarav, makin alotov hashmua. If you hear rumors, you can actually give someone lashes just for the rumor alone. Where do we learn this from? From Eli, the sons of Eli. If you remember, we're doing bad things. And it comes to Eli's attention. He hears rumors about what his sons are doing. So it says there, Shneimar al banai, don't do this, my sons, ki lo tov hashmua, right? Like, shame on you because the rumors about you are bad. So from here they learn that you can actually get lashes for rumors. Marzutra motiv laf sera al katve umakrele al banai. He would put a muzzle on their shoulders, and he would say al banai. Now, there's a big debate what exactly this means. Does this mean he would put a muzzle in order to, or a halter harness? Thank you, halter harness on him in order to give the lashes? Or would he just do that instead of lashes? Or would he use the halter harness for lashes? So there's three different ways of understanding what exactly went on here. Amarava, ba'ala be'ir, more halachot ba'yichud. If your husband's in the city, ein chosheshem mishum yichud, you don't have to worry, because the assumption is the person's not going to do anything if he knows the husband's in the city and could walk in at any moment. Amar Rabbi Yosef, again, we're starting to see, right, that there's all sorts of details about this. It's not so black and white, like we said yesterday, same thing here. Amar Rabbi Yosef, petach patuach l'reshut harabim, ein chosheshem mishum yichud. If you have a door open to the public domain, then also, right? So you could be alone in the house as long as your door is open and anyone could walk in at any time. Rabbibi ikle lebe Rabbi Yosef. So Rabbibi comes to Rabbi Yosef's house. They eat together. Batar de karach rifte. After they finish eating, Amar lehu. Now, Rabbibi was the guest. The guests usually went to the second floor. Okay, there were two floors, and how do you get from floor to floor? They didn't have stairs inside. They just put a ladder by the window. So from the floor to upstairs. So Rabbibi ate with Rabbi Yosef. And then Rabbi Yosef leaves him upstairs in the attic, and he says, listen, I'm going out. Because my wife's downstairs, and I don't want you to get downstairs. The only way downstairs is through the ladder, unless you're going to jump from the second floor. So what does he do? He pulls the ladder away, okay? He says, Amarlu, he says, Shkulu darga mitote bibi. He says to his people who work in his house, take the ladder from under bibi. I don't want to have any concern that he's going to end up with my wife. But wait, didn't Rabbi say, but he wasn't going out of the city. He was going to be in the city, and we don't have a yichud problem. Again, it's not black and white. Shari Rabivi de Shushbenite Havai V'Gaisabe. He was a very close friend, and he had a relationship with the woman, with the wife, and because of that, there was more of a concern. Okay, so again, technically, halachically speaking, maybe there's not a concern, but there is a concern. Okay. Amal Rav Kahana. Anashim mibachutz v'nashim mibifnim. Now, they talk about these kind of houses a lot, where you have an inner house and an outer house. The way it works is that the only way you could get out, imagine they're, let's say, in a courtyard, and the only way you could get out of the inner house is to go through the outer house. So now the question is, you have 2 men and 2 women. 2 men are sleeping in one house, 2 women are sleeping in the other. Which is going to be a yichud problem and which is not? Okay, where are we concerned that maybe one man will be alone with the 2 women and it will be a yichud problem, and when are we not worried? So we're going to have 2 opposite opinions here, and we'll see the logic of each one. Amar Rav Kahana, anashim b'chutz v'nashim b'fnim. If there's men in the outer house and women in the inner house, ein chosheshim mipnei yichud. Why? So Rashi explains, hachitzonim, they can't get to the inner house. And the outer people are always going out. They're never going in. So you're never worried that one man is going to go into the inner house. But if the men are in the outside and the women are in the inside, right? So there's no problem. But anashim bifnim, if the men are in the inside, because what will happen? One man might walk out of his house into the women's house, and they'll be there on their own, right? And that will be a yichud problem. Okay, but in the bright text is the exact opposite. Okay, so what's the opposite? Rashi explains that what? Okay, anashim, if the men are outside and the women are inside, we're worried that shemi yikanes echad lefnim because the inner house is more private. Theoretically, one of the men could go into the women's house and no one would even notice. So specifically, then it's going to be a problem because they're in this inner house and there's nobody there. When people are walking through, what are we worried about? Well, we thought in the first case, if the man walks into the 2 women's houses and that's on the heading out, well, the other man could walk through at any time anyway. So basically, the women's house is more like a public thoroughfare. And we're not really worried about it. Not really public, but we're just saying compare. So there's 2 opinions here. Amar Abaye, and 2 opposite. So Abaye says, since Rav Kahana says one way, and the bride says the opposite, we're going to be machmir and never be in a situation where there's 2 men here and 2 women there, whether one's in the inner, one's in the outer. We should avoid all those scenarios. Abaye Dair Golfe, Rabbi Dair Kani. Abaye would put, if there was a house like this with 2 men and 2 women, he would put jugs in between so that if somebody would try to go to the other house, he'd have to move the jugs. It would make a lot of noise, and then that would attract attention. We're going to see another story where someone does that to attract attention to prevent him from being with this woman. Rava would put kanimi, would put reeds, thinking like a gate made of reeds, like a fence. And if you move it, right, it's going to make noise, like a crinkling noise. And possibly it's the noise, or else maybe it was just a physical barrier because it's not as noisy as the jugs would be that really make a big noise. But maybe it was just a barrier so that you'd see the barrier and that would remind you. Again, these are all ways to give you another step so that you think more before you actually do something. Okay, Amar Avi. I'm thinking of when you hide cookies in the freezer, right? Like the more you have to work to find them, maybe by the time you get them, you'll actually say, maybe I really should be doing this. Obviously, very different situation, but again, dealing with temptation. Amar Avin, Skava Deshata Rigli says the biggest problem is during the Rega, in the holidays. That's when we have the most issues. Rashi says, what's the problem? Interestingly, he says, well, they would get together for the drasha, and men and women would come to the drasha, and then they would intermingle, and they would mingle, and they would end up, leading to problematic behavior. One might say maybe going to a drasha is a better way to mingle than other kinds of ideas. Hanach Shvuyata. Now we're going to have a famous story of Rav Amram Chasida. Now remember, he's called Rav Amram the Chasid, pious. Okay, we'll see, is he really pious or not? And maybe he got his name from the story. Okay, good question. So Hanach Shvuyata, and again, we're back to Shvuyot. Okay, we're now talking about people that were taken, these 2 women were taken captive, or I don't know, a bunch of women, we don't know how many. They were released from captivity, and I guess they were on their way home, and they stop in Nehardea. So now they don't live here. So Askinu lebei Rav Amram Chasida. So they bring them up to the attic of, again, the 2nd floor of Rav Amram Chasida's house. So either because he was the Chasid and they figured maybe best to put him in this house. Ashkulu darga mikamayu. Now they took the ladder away so that he wouldn't be able to get up there. One of them was coming by the window. Reminds me of like the Rapunzel story. Nafal Nahora Bi'ipuma, and this light comes shining on her face, and he sees her beautiful face, and he's tempted by her. Shakle Rab Amram Ledarga de Lo Havayachlim Be Asar Lemidlia. He takes this ladder that 10 people together couldn't even carry. This is a reference to the 10 people carrying the beam before. It's so heavy, 10 people can't carry it. And it's obviously a reference to the Yaakov story where he picks up the stone that no one could pick up because he was so in love. Dalia Lechude, he picks it up himself. Salik Basel, and he starts climbing up this ladder to get to the upstairs. Kimata the Palgadarga, when he gets halfway, Ifshach, he kind of puts his feet really hard on the step to like hold himself back. Okay, he like spreads his legs out to kind of like, I'm standing on this rung. I am not moving any higher. Okay, he's fighting with his evil inclination. Ramakala, but it's not enough to do that. He has to come up with a way that's what's going to prevent him. Well, outside intervention. So what does he do? Ramakala, he raises his voice and he starts screaming, Nura be Amram, fire in the house of Amram. So he starts screaming, fire, fire. Obviously, everybody comes to help. Okay, this sounds like the Curious George story, right? Where a fake fire alarm and he gets put in jail for this. So obviously, they all get upset with him. Atu Rabbanan, and they realize what's going on also, because they all knew that the women were in his house and they see him on the ladder. Amrule kasiftina. They say, you've humiliated us, like on your account. Like, this is embarrassing for us to see you like this. Amar lahu, he says to them, mutab tikasbu be amram ba'alma hadein, v'lo tikasbu mine la'alma da'ati. Says, better you be embarrassed by me in this world than you be embarrassed by me in the next world. And he basically said, look, it was worth it for me. Okay, the story is not over. He takes an oath and he says, my evil inclination should leave from my body. So imagine all the people standing here. This fiery thing comes out of his body and kind of goes up into the air or something. Okay, so basically the evil inclination, we've seen this before, by the way, and there was a story in the Kodesh Kodeshim about this, the evil inclination of being this fire, often viewed as a fire. This fire comes out of him, pillar of fire. Amarle, he starts talking to the pillar of fire, and he says, Chazidat nura va'ana bisra. You're fire and I am flesh. Now, usually fire destroys flesh. Va'ana adifna minech, but I got it right, I'm stronger than you. Okay, that's the end of the story. So again, was he called Rav Amram Chasida because of his story, or are they trying to tell us, which we're going to see in the next stories, that even a Chassid has an evil inclination? And I think what they're doing here, the same way, again, there's all different debates about, Avram Avinu and the mistakes he makes, and are they mistakes or are they not mistakes? And some of the commentaries say, Avram was perfect. And some of the commentaries say, no, Avram made mistakes. And it's good for us to see that our fathers made mistakes because we make mistakes. And, that's something we need to learn from. Likewise here, I think that they're using the example of these rabbis to say, both Rav, who said, I don't even trust myself, and this Rav Amram Chasida, and we're going to see with a bunch of other rabbis, they want to show that even the greatest people of the generation can make mistakes and can be seduced by women, and therefore these rules are very important, right? So if you say, oh, what do I need these rules for? You really never know how you might react to a particular given situation, and therefore best to put up these boundaries. So again, whether these stories really happen or they're stories that are told about these rabbis in order to teach a lesson, right? There's always a question about this. It's not clear that they happen or they happened exactly the way they were told. We know that because often stories are brought with different versions. So they obviously didn't necessarily happen the way they're told. We all know whenever people tell stories, details get changed. But anyway, whether they really happened or happened in some way, or they're just stories that are told about the rabbis in order to teach us a lesson. So that's, the way we have to wonder about these stories in general as well. Rabbi Meir haya mitlotzetz over Avera. He would make fun of people. He'd say, I don't get it. What are you so, why are you tempted by this? Okay, obviously he wasn't so tempted by these things and didn't really understand. So possibly the story is, we're going to happen in the story, him and the same thing that happened to Rabbi Akiva with a few minor details changed. They get seduced into some situation in order, it seems like, to teach them how to understand the people of their community that they couldn't really understand. So Yom Echad idmele Satan. Okay, we're going to have a whole bunch of stories about the Satan, right? The Satan, which is kind of like the evil inclination, right? He's the one trying to pull us to sin. So he appears as a woman. Okay, he appears on the other side of the river. Lo havamabra. There was no way to get to the other side. There was no ferry. Nakat mitzra v'ka'avar. He takes a rope and he gets himself to the other side, right? Like, again, something almost impossible to do, but he's so desirous to swim and he figures out a way to get to the other side. Kimata palga mitzra, but he gets halfway, shavke, and the Satan leaves him. and he no longer is tempted to sin, and he stops. It's similar. They have the same thing. Rav Amram got to halfway. Right there, he stopped himself. Here, the Satan just decided, okay, that was enough. All I wanted to do was to show him, in a minute we'll see also why he held back, but all I really wanted to do, like I accomplished my mission, which was so that he understand why other people sin. Amar, the Satan said, if I hadn't been warned, like they hadn't been announcing in the heavens the following thing, if I hadn't heard them saying, watch out for Rabbi Meir and his Torah, meaning he's a very solid rabbi, and because of that, I protected him. Otherwise, shavite l'damach tartema, I would have made his blood worth 2 me'ah, which is nothing, as I would have turned him into a nothing. If it hadn't been for what they said about him in the heavens, how great a Torah scholar is, that would have been the end of him. I wouldn't have left him. Same exact story with Rabbi Akiva. Like I said, a few minor differences. Rabbi Akiva, let's say, I would make fun of people who were sinning. He didn't understand them or mock them a little bit. Yom echad idmele satan ki itaparesh dikla. So this time he appears as a woman at the top of a palm tree. Imagine trying to climb a palm tree. It's not exactly an easy tree to climb. There's no branches on the side to hang on. Well, somehow magically, right, he gets up there, he grabs onto the tree and he starts climbing up. He mata the palge didikla halfway, shavke, the Satan leaves him, and again, same thing. Amar ilav de machraze berki is arubu Rabbi Akiva v'torato shaviti l'damach tartema. If they hadn't been warning me in the heavens, watch out for Rabbi Akiva and his Torah, he's such a great scholar, I would have turned him into nothing. Pleimo. Now we have a story with Pleimo. And remember this first line because it's going to come back at the end of the story. Every day he would say, Gira be'ene de Satan. I'm piercing arrows into the eyes of the Satan. Okay, meaning, I wake up this morning, I'm ready to fight you. Okay, I'm strong, I can get you. Well, the Satan didn't like this. So, Yom Male Yom Kippur Hava. Okay, Erev Yom Kippur. They're sitting eating their meal before Yom Kippur, almost entering the holiest day of the year. Id Mele Ka'anya. So comes the Satan and he dresses up as a poor person. Atakara Bava, he knocks at the door, he wants some food. Afikule Rifta, so they give him some bread, they take it out to him, and they leave him outside the house, and they give him some bread. Amarle, Yomakia Idna, Kule Yomagavai, on a day like this, everyone's inside, and you're going to leave me outside? So, I lay Krivile Rifta. So, they give him bread, but what do? They don't have him sit at the table with them, they put him on the side. In a minute, you'll see why. But they put him on the side, and they say, here, you can eat right here. You want a house? Fine, we'll let you have a roof over your head, but you're not going to eat with us. Amarle, Yomakia Idna, day like today, Kuleama Tacha, everyone's at the table. Va'ana lechudai, and I'm sitting by myself. Not nice the way you're treating me. So atiu atvua atacha. So they seat him at the table. Havayativ melo nafsha shichne v'kibe alena. This is the exact same wording with Rabbi Chanina bar Papa. He was full of boils on his body. Okay, he looked disgusting. This is what Rabbi Chanina bar Papa did to prevent him from, from preventing this woman from seducing him. Well, in this case, he's full of these boils. Now he's sitting at the table with them, this disgusting guy. It's probably why they didn't want to let him in the first place. And he was doing disgusting things. Okay, it's like a despicable person. Amrule, they said to him, turning out Amabet, Tiv Shapir, okay, sit appropriately. Like, this is not nice what you're doing at the table. Disgusting. Amrule Havali Kasa, please give me a cup. Yavale Kasa, they gave him a cup. He starts coughing and he spits his saliva and all that stuff, his phlegm or whatever into the cup. Disgusting. Nacharube, they said, this is disgusting. Shaka umit. All of a sudden, he makes himself as if he's dead. Okay, so they're sitting at the table. They were kind of offending him. I mean, he was offending them, and then they were reacting like that. Next thing they know, he dies. Well, the problem is that people started hearing, rumors started spreading, and Shamu dahabu ka'amre Pleimo katagavra, Pleimo katagavra. People started saying, right? Imagine the scene. There's this guy in Pleimo's house, and he dies while he's eating. Maybe the Pleimo poisoned him, and the authorities, maybe the Romans or whoever was in charge at the time, starts saying, they start going to get Pleimo, and they want to punish him for killing this guy. So Arek v'tasha nafshe bebeit hakisei, again, back to the Rabbi Chanina bar Papa story. He runs away, the exact same wording, and he hides himself instead of the beit merchatz, the bathhouse, he hides in the bathroom, which is one and the same. There are also places where there's usually evil spirits, not exactly the safest place to hide. Azal batrei nafal kameh. So now the Satan chases him and comes before him. When he sees the guy is really upset about what happened, So the Satan decides to reveal himself to him. Amarle, my time Amar Tachi. And now we get to the real problem. Why was the Satan so upset with him? He says, why did you say that about me every morning? Arrows in the eyes of the Satan, right? It's offensive. So he says, Elahechiema. Says, what do you expect me to say, right? My job is to fight against you. So what's wrong with what I said? To which he answers him, very important line, Amarle, Le mamar rachmana nigar bebe Satan. You should be saying God should put arrows in the eyes of the Satan, not you. This isn't about you and your strength. Your strength comes from God. Okay, this is the theme we're going to see also in tomorrow's stuff. Very interesting theme to end our Masechet. That really the strength is in the eyes, is in the hands of God. You think it's your own strength. It's not your own strength. It's not that you're going to be strong to fight against Satan. Yeah, you're going to do your share, but God is going to help. Okay, now Rabbi Akiva bar Ashi, a new story. This is a very funny story, I think, although very tragic. Every time you would say tachanun, when you fall on your hands, you bend down and you say this beseeching of God. He would say, but God should protect me from the Yetzer Hara. Now one day his wife is going by while he's davening and she hears him saying these words. Amra, she says, this is a very strange thing. What's my husband worried about his desires? He hasn't slept with me in years. Okay, like this guy does not seem to be a guy who has a very strong desire. My time so why on earth is he saying this? So she's a little bit questioning what's going on here. Well, Yom Achada have a garis begin to. So one day he's learning in the garden. Kashtanafshi, she dresses herself up, right? Disguises herself. Chalfa v'tanya come in. She goes right by him. Amarla manat. He says, "Who are you?" Amra, ana charuta de Hadran miyoma. I am charuta, who according to Rashi was a famous prostitute, and I'm coming back from my day's work. Tava, so he wants to have relations with her. Amrele, she says to him, well, I tiniale lahach rumana deresh sutita. Go get me this pomegranate at the top of the tree. Shvar azal I tiniale. He goes and he brings it to her, and obviously they engage in relations. What's the meaning of go get the pomegranate? I'm not sure. Maybe she was trying to seduce him to like a more quieter place of the orchard. Anyway, they end up having relations. Now, he thinks he had a relationship with the prostitute. It turned out it was his wife. Ki'ata the Bete, when he gets back into his house, have a kashadra debitu tanura. His wife, somehow she got back quicker than him, and she's sitting there making a fire in the oven. Remember the oven story, same thing. Salik v'kayata bigabe. So he runs and he goes and sits inside the oven. She says, Tim Amrele, my hi. She says, what are you doing? Now, different from the other story. The other story, the woman had no clue why he was going in the oven. In this story, she knew exactly why he was going in the oven. Amarla, hachi v'hachi have a maase, right? She wanted to get him to confess, and in fact, he does confess. He says, listen, the following thing happened. Amrele, she says, Tim, Ana havai, that was me. Well, he doesn't believe her. Lo eshkachba. He really won't believe her at all. Until she gives him simanim. Okay, she tells him, right, what exactly transpired, and he realizes this was really her. Okay, it's interesting. This, by the way, is reminiscent in a bunch of ways of the David and Tamar, the Yehuda and Tamar story, right, where number one, like no one was having relations with her for a year, right? They were supposed to do yibum and they didn't. And then we have the simanim that in the right, he doesn't believe it's her, and then she has to pull out the simanim and say it is. Amarla, ana mihali isuri chavne. He says, you know what? It doesn't matter that it was you, because I intended to sin, and that is terrible. Kol yamav shalatot tzaddik, very tragic. All the days of that tzaddik, although he really was to blame, hava mitaneh ad shemepo tamita. Okay, he basically he tortured himself until he ends up dying from this. Okay, like he dies out of depression, mental, right? You see here mental illness and how tragic mental illness can be. Tanya. Now, what was so bad about having intent to sin, even if you didn't really sin? So they're going to learn it from here. The husband can annul her vows, but God will forgive her. So now the big question, what are they talking about? Well, it's because if he annulled her neder, her vow, then there is no vow. So then what's the difference? She's not sinning then if she goes against her vow. So what do they say? It's B'isha Nadrab Nazir. We learned this already, by the way, in Nazir. It's a woman who takes a vow to be a Nazir. V'shama ba'ala ve'ferla, and he hears and he nullifies the vow. V'hi lo yad'a she'ferla ba'ala. She doesn't know. Now she thinks she's still a Nazirah. What happens? And then she drinks wine and she becomes impure to dead people, thinking that she's a Nazirah when in fact she's really not. So there you see, she needs forgiveness for that. Okay, and this is where you see intending to sin without actually doing a sin, because there she wasn't even a Nizirah, she just thought she was, is you get punished, right? You need atonement for that. And that's why this rabbi was very upset his whole life, or this guy. It's Rabbi Akiva bar Ashi, right? It's very interesting. This is like a known Talmud Chacham, right? He was very upset all his life about this. And in fact, we're going to see now two things, which is having intent to sin and not sinning, or sinning without intent. And Rabbi Akiva is going to cry about both those things. Okay, Rabbi Akiva, when we get to this pasuk, he would cry. Amal, he would say the following. You think you're eating pork, and it turns out it was kosher meat. And that's what basically this is saying. Same idea as the woman who's in Nizirah. You need atonement for this. So all the more so, someone who actually has intent to sin and actually does this sin, all the more so should he be punished. And likewise, Rabbi Akiva when you get to the following pasuk, he would also cry. Oh, sorry, I skipped. Sorry. Likewise, there's another pasuk. No, I didn't know, right? And you didn't know you were guilty, and you have to do atonement. This is our classic korban chatat that you bring for shkaga when you didn't know you did something. So when Rabbi Akiva would get to this pasuk, he would cry and say the following: Shuman is permitted, chaylev is forbidden. You thought you were eating, they look the same, right? You thought you were eating shuman, and it turns out it was chaylev, and you have to bring a sin offering. It says, lo yadav Hashem v'nasav no. So mishin is kaven le'achol chaylev, v'ala b'yado chaylev. If you intended to eat chaylev, and you actually ate the chaylev, al achakama v'kama. And Isi ben Yehuda Omer, lo yadav Hashem v'nasav no, davar ze yidvu kol adavim. Like, this is what people should cry about, okay? This is something very upsetting, because wow, if you don't even intend and you're going to get punished. And this, by the way, is also a lead into Bava Kama, because one of the main things we're going to talk about in Bava Kama is that your intent doesn't matter at all. It's what you do that matters, your actions. And if your actions, you unintentionally cause damage, it doesn't matter. You're liable for damages. So this is a very important theme that's going to come up. And I think they end our Masechet on it to kind of as prelude to our next Masechet. Okay, back to, that was all a story about sexual desire, that of a great rabbi again, which was all, then we got off on an aside about this idea of intending to commit a sin, even though you didn't really commit a sin, and how bad that is, and likewise the reverse. So now we get back to halachot, okay, off of stories, back to halachot, although we will have more stories, although not much more. Now the Mishnah had said you could be alone with your mother, a mother, son, father, daughter. But here, Rav Asi says, Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav Asi, even with your sister, you could be mityached, secluded, but dar imi movim bito. But you could even live on a permanent basis with a mother, son, father, daughter. Now, when Rav Yehuda said the statement that Rav Asi said in front of Shmuel, his rabbi, Shmuel said, what are you talking about? Every arayot, including a mother, son, no seclusion allowed. He even goes so far as to say with an animal there was concern for bestiality. Tanan. So now they say, but the Mishnah says, you could even sleep with unclothed next to each other. Utiyuv to Shmuel, and this would seem to go against Shmuel. Shmuel could answer, well, according to you who say there's no problem, well, Haditanya, it says in a Braita, your sister, your mother-in-law, and all the arayot, including father, daughter, mother, son, you can only be alone in a room, which means really you can't be alone, if there's two witnesses there. Right? Only if there's witnesses. They don't really mean witnesses, they just mean two other people with you. And it sounds like without witnesses, not. So how are you going to respond to that? So basically Shmuel says, right, they question him. Again, he's not there to answer, but they're answering for him. We'll go with the counter question. Your theory doesn't make sense right? Your Mishnah doesn't make sense in light of this source. To which the obvious answer is Ela Tanaihi. It's a machloket between Tanaim, what the halach is. Tanya, as we see in a Braita, and now as opposed to our Mishnah, which seems to allow father and daughter, mother and son, this Braita is going to say, Amar Rabbi Meir, he's a haruvi mipnei biti. Okay, warn me not to be alone with my daughter. Amar Rabbi Tarfon, he's a haruvi mipnei kalati. Tarfon said not to be alone with my daughter-in-law. Ligleg alavotot talmid. one of the, and again, we see this over and over in the sugya because it makes sense. People are saying, what? Of course, nothing's going to happen between you and your daughter-in-law. Well, Amar Rabbi Akiva Mishum Rabbi Chanim and Gamliel, Lo hayu yamim moatim. It's the classic line they love to say. Not too many days passed after that comment. Ad shenichshalo totami b'chamoto. He ended up in a sexual encounter with his mother-in-law. Okay, so he was mocking him, and then in the end, it happened to him as well. Back to the behema. Okay, this bestiality, which seems to have been common among Romans in the time, so maybe that's why nowadays it's quite uncommon. But afilu in behema, abayim mechalale mikula dabra. He would clear out his fields of all animals when he was out in the fields. Rav Shesha Marbele Mitzri, he would put a boundary between him and the animals, like a fence. Rav Chanan min Nahardia ikla Rav Kahana lepumnara. Rav Chanan of Nahardia gets to Rav Kahana in Pumnara. Chazi diyata v'kagaris v'kaime behema kame. He sees him learning, and there's an animal in front of him. Amarle lo sever lamar afilu in behema. Wait, don't you learn that even with an animal you can't be alone? So how are you learning Torah here, and there's an animal right in front of you? Amarle lavadata. He says, I didn't know. Now, either, what does it mean I didn't know? It could mean I didn't realize the animal was there. I wasn't paying attention. I was learning. My head was in the books. I didn't notice anything around me. Or I didn't even know that you can't do that, meaning, there's different opinions about it, and I didn't know. I never heard that halacha that you can't be alone with an animal. Amar Rava. Now we're going to go back to, and maybe this is a nice way to end all of Seder Nashim with back to the beginning of Yivamot, where we talk about Yivamot, 2 women who are supposed to marry, the brother, 2 women who are married to the same man. And we always talk about the tension between them, the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law, right? All those kind of situations, to which Rava says, well, a man can be alone with 2 women, but if they're women who hate each other and would do anything to get back at the other, or at least there's concern they might hate each other, then those 2 women can actually be alone with the man because you're not worried about it. So, okay, 2 women who are supposed to yivam to the same person, or 2 women who are actually already married to the same person, a woman and her mother-in-law, a woman and her husband's daughter, okay, because again, that's a relationship of tension. This one's a little different. It's not exactly tension, but a woman and a child who's too young, okay, that she's not, okay, she understands the concept of what bi'ah is, what sexual relations are, but she's not yet interested in it. So there's this stage, and we're going to talk about stages at the end here, but she kind of understands enough, but she's not considered like 2 women who might engage in sexual relations. She has no interest in that right now. She's too young for that. Okay, higdilu zeyashem b'ksuto. Okay, once they get older, you can, when you're a young age, you can be with your mother or father. Bikiruv basar, okay, being close, even without clothing on. Again, very strange to imagine they would do this, but maybe at a very little age. But anyway, that's one. But once you get older, you can be in the same bed, but as long as you're wearing clothes. And again, this is probably a situation where they didn't have a lot of beds in the house and they needed to share beds. So what's the age? V'kama. Okay, we're not at the age 3. Age 3, even though technically speaking, and this is good proof that whole thing is just kind of a theoretical thing, but we're really only worried from age 9 that she's going to really engage in relations, and therefore from that age, again, you can't anymore be with unclothed. And a boy, 12 years. Some people say it's 12 for her and 13 for him, like the ages we normally know about bar mitzvah. Again, in those days, those ages weren't as clear as they are now. But if she's 9 or if she's 12 and she hasn't hit puberty at all yet, no hairs, no breast development, then we don't count it at all. Okay, then we're not worried. This is not applicable. Now he comes and says another interesting thing, which is it goes by, okay, we had before the girl knows but isn't really interested yet. This is once you're embarrassed to stand naked in front of someone, okay, there's a certain understanding that he thinks that understanding goes with an age that you're already interested. We assume, and this is a good question, I don't know if this is really true to me, it seems young, but once a girl is aware of her nakedness, that already means she's enticed to sin. Okay, last part for today. We are going to end with the story. And again, it's going to highlight this issue of it's not exactly black and white. Rav Akiva bar Abba ikla lebei Rav Chisda chadni. So Rav Akiva bar Abba comes to his son-in-law's house. His daughter's married to Rav Chisda, and shachle lebat barte otve bekanfe. So he takes his granddaughter, who's under the age of 12, we're going to see, and he puts her on his lap. Okay? Typical grandfather would do to his grandchild. Well, Amarle, so Rav Chisda doesn't like this. He thinks this is not appropriate. He says, Lo Samar Lamar Dimkacha, don't you know that she's betrothed already? Okay, she was young, but she was betrothed. And basically that means like you should be extra careful because she's Ne'esh Ish and you really shouldn't have her on your lap. Well, right, you wonder if there was something more going on here between Rav Chisda and his father-in-law, because you're going to see that they each keep picking on each other. Okay, he's going to start up with them and then he's going to give him back. So Amarle, he says, you're telling me she's betrothed? You yourself did something wrong. You went against what Rav said. You have to wait until she's old enough to agree to the betrothal. What are you doing betrothing her at such a young age, right? So we have classic father-in-law critiquing the son-in-law, but also the son-in-law started with him. Mar Nami Averleah to Shmuel. So Rav Chisda sends him back. He says, well, you're going against what Shmuel said. Amar Shmuel, right? People love to say, oh, you're going against what Rav said. Oh, you're going against what Shmuel said, because Rav and Shmuel were the greatest Amoraim. Well, the Amar Shmuel, you're not allowed to use a woman now. It's a very unclear term. We saw this before, what exactly it means. He seems to mean, because you're putting her on her lap, you're using her. I don't know exactly what that means, but okay. So which he said, which really just means like you're not behaving appropriately with a woman, even though it's your granddaughter. Amalei. He says, oh, you're throwing me at Shmuel? I'll throw you a different statement to Shmuel, but I hold on. Damar Shmuel, hakol l'shem shamayim. It's all about what your intent is. And then again, it goes back to what we talked about before about your intent to sin. And here's your intent to do good. He says, I was just putting my granddaughter on my lap. Like that's not, I have no intent for any sexual anything. That's not what was going on here. And as long as it's hakol b'dei shamayim, it's fine. Now, obviously, how far you take this is a situation where it's a grandfather and a granddaughter, not a situation where it's two random people that are alone in a room or something. So anyway, but again, as we saw stressed all throughout, number one, there's a lot of gray areas in both directions, right? Situations where it wouldn't be relevant, laws of yichud, and yet situations where you think it's not relevant because you think, oh, I'm above this. And the Gemara continues to tell you, don't think you're above anything because even the greatest of the greats have fallen into traps with this kind of thing. So a lot of food for thought. We will end here for today, and I'm excited to be finishing the Masechet with you on Sunday. And if you haven't registered, make sure to register to get your own personal link. Everyone gets their own link. You can't share a link from someone else, or maybe, I don't know, it's a little complicated. So get your own link, and we will meet up there. And tomorrow, Bava Kama, new Seder, new Masechet, new Seder. Looking forward.